Hi, third and fourth graders. It's time for the next installment of the BFG. And this is the two chapters I'm going to share with you today are really, really funny. They're among the funniest in the whole book. The first one is called The Blood Bottler. And the Blood Bottler is one of the big giants, the man-eating giants. And he comes to the BFG's cave because he hears him speaking. He hears the BFG speaking to somebody, and he thinks he's hiding a human being. So there is a very funny scene, but also, a little dangerous with Sophie and the Blood Bottler and Snozcumbers. And then the best chapter in the whole book comes after that, and that is called Frobscottle and oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot the title. Frobscottle and Whiz Poppers. And we're going to finally learn what Whiz Poppers are. So you're going to love this. All right, here we start. The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the Blood Bottler." But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked, except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten Snozcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who was you jabbling to in here just now?" he boomed. "I is jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Piffle fizz," shouted the blood bottler. "Bug swallop," he boomed. "You is talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yes, yes," boomed the blood bottler. "I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling it out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper." The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here," he stammered. "Why don't you leave me alone?" And here is a picture of the Blood Bottler in the BFG's cave. And you can see how really disgustorous he is and how much bigger than the BFG is. And remember, the BFG is around 24 feet tall. The Blood Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little scrum screwer," he shouted. "Piffling little swizzfigler, skimpy little bottlewort, prunty little pogswiggler. I is now going to search the primroses." And he grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope of doing that. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous Snozcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The Blood Bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurty lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Blood Bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Oh, nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You was only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog swaggler," cried the Blood Bottler. And soon the Blood Bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The Snozcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, remember that's a big, big baby buggy, was not going to hide her if the Blood Bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped out half a dozen of those seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snozcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place. But what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back toward the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. In any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten snozcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy, rotsome glubbage you was eating, boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozcumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash. And for a moment the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. Oh, that is the scrumdiddlyumptious snozcumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never tasting a snozcumber, blood bottler? Human beans is juicier, said the blood bottler. You is talking rummy tot, said the BFG, growing braver by the second, and he was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. I is happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on, but please, when you sees how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the snozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You is not swizz-figgling me, is you? Said the blood bottler. Oh, never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, oh, how scrumdiddlyumptious this wonder veg is. The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, said the blood bottler. I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I am smashing it over your sludgy little head. And he picked up the snozcumber, and he began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, don't, but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit a huge hunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth, and she caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath, and it stank of bad meat. Then there was utter darkness. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once more, and she prayed that she would be killed quickly. Yow! Yelled the blood bottler. Ugh! Ugh! Eek! And then he spat. All the great lumps of snozcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, went shooting across the cave. And here is a picture of this blood bottler spitting out the snozcumber, and there is Sophie flying out of his mouth. Luckily, he doesn't realize it's a human being. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she would most certainly have been killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swiller. And he rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. Oh, you is not loving it? Asked the BFG innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it, yelled the blood bottler. That is the most disgusterous taste that is ever touching my teeth. You must be buggles to be swallowing sludge like that. Every night you could be galloping off happy as a hamburger. and gobbling juicy human beings. Well, eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is guzzly and glumptious, shouted the blood bottler, and tonight I is galloping off to Chile to swabble a few chili beans. And if you is wishing to know why I is choosing Chile, I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, very dignified. I is choosing Chile, the blood bottler said, because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. It is important I has plenty of cold eats in scuttling hot weather like this, and the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beings from Chile is very chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is saying they want to gallop off to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers, the blood bottler said. I is very fond indeed of English school chidlers. They has a nice inky booky flavor. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant people, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be a giant. You is a squeaky little squiddler. You is a squibbling little pipsqueak. You is a cream puffnut. With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie, he whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, she said, and the BFG picked her up and held her up tenderly in the palm of his hand. Oh, I is so happy to be finding you all in one lump, he said. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. And Sophie told him what had happened. And there I was telling him to eat the filthsome snozcumber, and you was all the time inside it, the BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, you poor little chidler, cried the BFG. You was all covered in snozcumber and giant spit, and he set about cleaning her up as best he could. I is hating those other giants more than ever now, he said. You know what I should like? What, Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I would be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me think if I can think of some way of doing it. And here is the giant, let me get the picture right, cleaning off Sophie, who has snozcumber and giant spit all over you. And next is really, I think, the best chapter in the whole book, Frob, Scottle, and Whiz Poppers. Are you ready? I'm going to take a little drink. And we'll stop after this one. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she been at home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting, smelly snozcumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have a little water? She said. Water? Cried the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking Frobscottle. Is it as nasty as your snozcumbers? Sophie asked. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly, and he got up from his chair and went to the second huge cupboard, and he opened it and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside it was pale green, and the bottle was half full. Here is Frobscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up proud and high as though it contained some rare wine. Delumptious, frizzy Frobscottle, he shouted, and he gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried, and indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of traveling upwards and bursting on the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. Well, in our fizzy drinks, Sophie said, the bubbles are always going up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having the bubbles going upwards. That that's the most flush-bunking rubbish I as ever hearing. Why do you say that? Sophie asked. You is asking me why? Cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You is actually meaning to tell me you cannot see why it is a scrawny mistake to have the bubbles flying up instead of down? You said it was flush bunking. Now you're saying it's scrawny? Which is it? Sophie asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is a flush bunking and a scrawny mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duckhound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squeakers and buzzwangles, I is frittered if I know how you can think at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I will explain, said the BFG, but tell me first, what name is you calling your frobscottle by? Oh, one is Coke, Sophie said, another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles is all going up? They all go up, Sophie said. Castasterous, cried the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a castasterous disasteroff. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. And here is the BFG holding up a bottle of frobscottle, and you can see the bubbles are going down instead of up like they do with our soda. All right, here comes the funny part. If you will listen carefully, I will try to explain, said the BFG, but your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well, then. When you is drinking this cokey drink of yours, said the BFG, is it going straight down into your tummy? Is that right or is it left? It's right, Sophie said. And the bubbles is also going into your tummy, right or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubbles is fizzing upwards? Of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come swish-whiffling up your throat and out of your mouth and make a falsome, belchy burp. Well, that is often true, Sophie said, but what's wrong with a little burp now and again? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthsome, the BFG said. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said. What was it you called it? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With frobscottle, Sophie said, the bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? Asked the BFG, frowning. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A whiz popper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whiz poppers all the time. Whiz poppers is a sign of happiness. It is music in our ears. You surely is not telling me that a little whiz popping is forbidden among human beings. Well, it is considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But you is whiz popping, is you not, now and again? Asked the BFG. Well, everyone is whiz popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz popping, presidents are whiz popping, glamorous film stars are whiz popping, little babies are whiz popping, but where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now having a swiggle of this delicious frobscottle, and you will see the happy result. And the BFG shook the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. And for a few moments the big friendly giant stood quite still, and then a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosions actually lifted the enormous giant clear off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz-popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle toward her. "Don't you have a cup?" Sophie said. "No cups, only bottle." And Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous Frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was! It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, and with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor. And the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. "It's lovely!" she cried. "Just wait," said the BFG, flapping his ears, and Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower down her tummy. Then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. "Bravo!" shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. "You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more." And that's where we're going to leave off. And here you can see the picture of the BFG whiz popping and Sophie looking, and he's holding the bottle of Frobscottle. And that's where we're going to leave off today. And I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.